There was a good reason for why the medical staff at the clinic nicknamed Caroline Davis the Sleeping Beauty. It was most likely because the unusual patient was admitted to the clinic 10 years ago and had been in a coma ever since. It all happened after Caroline nearly drowned in a river when she was 9 years old. That dreadful day was the cause of Caroline's permanent confinement in a hospital bed. Thanks to the kind lakegoers who were there to witness the event, Caroline was saved, but no one could wake her up. Caroline was completely dependent on life support throughout her coma and had to be cared for by the clinic's nursing staff. When Caroline's parents, Deborah and Robert Davis, saw their baby girl in a terrible condition, they were shocked and shaken to their core. The couple barely made ends meet, and with all the hospital bills they had to pay to keep their daughter alive, they were on the verge of despair. What made matters worse was that Caroline was a late child. The couple had her in their late 40s. Now, with barely a penny to their name, the couple would do anything to save their poor baby. Fortunately, the clinic's medical staff and other good Samaritans chose to help the family with the financial struggle and keeping their daughter alive. Anyone who saw the face of the blonde-haired angel couldn't stay indifferent and was moved to lend her poor parents a helping hand. The medical staff of the clinic had grown attached to Caroline over the 10 long years, considering her the #1 permanent patient. After a lot of deliberation, the clinic's doctors and nurses decided to hold an annual fundraiser for Caroline's treatment to support her parents who couldn't afford to pay the bills. "Thank you. My husband and I are so grateful. I just can't thank you enough," said Deborah Davis with tears in her eyes, realizing that her daughter's accident had a very strong effect on the hearts of so many kind people. The fundraisers couldn't always cover the costs of treatment, but nonetheless, they were a big help to the struggling family's budget. Unfortunately, 9-year-old Caroline didn't wake up that year, nor did she wake up the next year. In fact, over the next 10 years, she had changed significantly, going from a sweet girl to a true beauty, all the while in a coma. Needless to say, Caroline's parents endured a lot of suffering. With each passing year, they gradually lost all hope that their daughter would ever wake up. For many years, Caroline was the center of everyone's concern and sympathy. It pained the nursing staff to even look at Caroline, knowing that she had been deprived of her childhood, all thanks to that unfortunate accident. Beverly Mitchell was probably the most concerned for the young girl. She worked as a nurse in the department where Caroline was being treated. Beverly became so attached to the girl that deep in her heart, she considered herself a second mother for Caroline. Beverly didn't only care for Caroline, she also talked to her every day as if she were conscious and could answer her back. While caring for the girl, Beverly would often play music and even read books to her. Most of the clinic staff thought that what Beverly was doing was a little absurd and wouldn't help the comatose patient. But in spite of her cynical colleagues, Beverly continued to take care of Caroline, who had since become very dear to her. Beverly was a firm believer that one day Caroline would wake up and be able to live a normal life. Unfortunately, those 10 years had taken their toll on Caroline's parents. The couple was now so old that they couldn't visit their daughter at the hospital every day anymore. One day, after an unfortunate series of events, Beverly suffered a leg injury. She slipped on an icy walkway in the middle of the winter and landed in her bed with a fractured leg, a dislocation, and several torn ligaments. The recovery period was a lengthy one, and Beverly had to spend about a year on sick leave before she could resume her duties. Not a day went by, though, that the compassionate woman didn't think of Caroline, who was left without her care. Beverly was very concerned that the girl would not be adequately cared for by the other nurses. "How is my sleeping beauty doing?" she thought sadly, and counted the days until her cast would finally be removed. During the time that Beverly was on her sick leave, Caroline's mother died, and her father lost all hope and had a stroke. After a full recovery, Beverly finally went back to work. The first thing Beverly did was go into Caroline's room. "How are you, my dear? Still lying here like before?" Beverly asked, adjusting the covers that had been slipped aside. As she did so, Beverly spotted a strange mark on the crease of Caroline's right arm. She could have sworn that it wasn't there before. "No, this can't be happening," she exclaimed, still struggling to believe her eyes. Caroline looked very different, and she seemed to have lost a lot of weight. When Beverly brought the doctor in, it turned out that the girl had obvious injection marks on her inner right elbow. However, her left arm had the catheter that they were using for all the medical treatment. The news had a shocking effect on the clinic's medical staff. Why would a girl need an injection if all the medicine she needed was fed through the catheter already? Beverly wondered. Fortunately, even though Caroline was still in a coma, the doctors were able to draw blood for extensive testing. None of the medical staff at the clinic expected the results they got. "I don't believe it," exclaimed Beverly when she saw the results of the blood test with her own eyes. Apparently, there were traces of a potent drug in the comatose girl's blood. This drug, if taken over a long period of time, was known to induce cardiac arrest. Apparently, while Beverly was on sick leave, someone had taken advantage of Caroline's helplessness to try and get rid of her. The police immediately launched an investigation, and the story instantly gained widespread publicity. Frightened by the outrage of the city's residents, the clinic's management decided to disconnect Caroline from life support. This was how the head doctor hoped to hush up the case and avoid large-scale proceedings. It wasn't a tough call to make either, as the girl's father had already passed away, leaving her a complete orphan. Moreover, all the costs associated with keeping Caroline alive ended up being the responsibility of the clinic's staff and medical personnel, who had been donating their own money several times a year for the past 10 years. When Beverly learned of management's decision to take Caroline off of life support, she was fuming. "She's a human being too. Don't you understand? Give her another chance," the nurse pleaded tearfully. Unfortunately, the head doctor didn't care much for Beverly's opinion. Filled with heartache and despair, Beverly hurried to Caroline's room. "Wake up, honey. Wake up. You're a strong girl. I know you are. Wake up, please," Beverly begged, holding the girl's small hand in hers. All her attempts to elicit any kind of reaction from Caroline proved unsuccessful, so the nurse sobbed uncontrollably. She didn't even notice how a few of her bitter tears splashed down on the girl's cheek. A few minutes passed, and then, suddenly, Caroline's eyelash gently began to flutter. A faint shiver ran down her body. When Beverly caught sight of this, she gasped audibly. This woke the girl up. Deep down, even after waking up from a decade-long sleep, Caroline was still a young elementary school student. On the outside, though, she was a grown woman who now had to fend for herself in a world that was so hostile to her. "I have no home. My parents are dead, and I have no idea how to live my life," said Caroline, tears welling up in her eyes. "Don't worry, sweetheart. You've been like a daughter to me for so long. I'll help you," answered Beverly, hugging the trembling girl. What the nurse felt for Caroline for the longest time was motherly love, one of the strongest feelings in the world. After the girl completely recovered from her coma, a series of investigations led the police to discover that the person who had been plotting against Caroline was lurking within the very walls of the clinic. As it turned out a little later, Caroline's arch-nemesis ended up being one of the hospital attendants who was most insistent on Caroline being completely disconnected from her life support system. It was Stephen Price. During the first police interrogations, he revealed that he wanted to get rid of Caroline because he was jealous of how much attention she was getting. Stephen, a loser by nature, had been hired to work at the clinic a couple of months before. He was annoyed that Caroline's lifeless body had so many people loving and revering her. Stephen tried to pay the police off, but they didn't budge, arresting him right in his hospital scrubs and leading him to the station in handcuffs. Beverly was largely to thank for Stephen's capture. She did everything she could to fast-track the case and prevent it from being set aside. Now that justice had been served and the perpetrator was convicted, Beverly and Caroline began to live together like mother and daughter. If it hadn't been for Beverly's attentiveness, her amazing care and sacrifice, no one knows how many years Caroline would have stayed in her coma.